Talk boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. It's official. Marlen Esparza versus Gabriela Alaniz Flyweight Championship rematch in play for March in Las Vegas for the undercard of Zerto Ramirez's bid to become a cruiserweight champion. His upcoming fight with Arsene Goulamarian. BoxingScene.com has learned that a unified flyweight championship rematch is in play between Houston's Esparza and Argentina's Alaniz. The bout is targeted to take place on a DAZN show this March in Las Vegas. Golden Boy Promotions, Esparza's career-long promoter, has shows planned for March 16th, William Zepeda versus Maxie Hughes, and March 30th, Arsene Goulamarian versus Gilberto Zerto Ramirez.
Wow, Golden Boy's rolling out more shows than the PBC. They already had 2 this month.
A deal was struck between the pair of familiar foes after the WBO ordered the two to enter talks last December for a mandated title fight rematch. Far more progress was made then when they were previously instructed last summer to negotiate terms, only to hit a pause when it was believed that Esparza would vie for the undisputed crown instead. And those talks fell apart, those talks with Gabriela Fundoria, who's going to be in action this weekend, defending her title for the first time opposite the ring, unbeaten Cristina Cruz.
There were talks that she would fight Marlen Esparza for undisputed, but things fell apart. Now she's fighting Cristina Cruz and Marlen is fighting Gabriela Alaniz for the second time.
Esparza won their first meeting via a disputed majority decision last July at the AT&T Center in San Antonio. She retained her lineal and unified WBC and WBA titles and claimed Alaniz's WBO title with the win. There was enough public support for the previously unbeaten Alaniz, who is promoted by Georgina Rivero's OR Promotions, to find the grounds to file a protest with the WBO. A review of the bout prompted the San Juan, Puerto Rico headquartered organization to demand that Esparza face Alaniz for a second time.
Every title that Marlen's ever won, it's always the same thing. The fight was close enough that it could have gone the other way.
The Beth Zamora Silva fight for the WBC, the Naoko Fujioka fight for the WBA, and the more recent Gabriela Alaniz fight for the WBO, except this time, those close calls and close decisions finally caught up to her.
The WBO themselves decided to intervene because the fight with Gabriela, the scoring, it's too partial.
It was too partial, and ahead of the match, I said that as much as I like Gabriela Alaniz, and her being the volume puncher, the strong puncher that she is, she's gonna have to go in there and hit Marlen Esparza with a chair to get a draw, because she won't win a decision. And so long as Marlen Esparza is still standing at the end of that match, the judges will give it to her.
That's what I said.
In hindsight, I should have exercised similar judgment in my assessment for Jonas versus Mayer, because, that's what ended up happening. Michaela did enough to win a decision, more than enough, but in the end, they gave it to the hometown fighter. The fight was in Liverpool. Natasha's from Liverpool. You don't need to be Sherlock Holmes to figure it out. Favorable decision, home-cooked decision. It is what it is. Now, Marlen Esparza, she's gonna have to run it back with Gabriela Alaniz. And there's a credible argument that Gabriela might have done enough to win the first fight. But in the second,
rematch.
Gabriela's a pressure fighter and a volume puncher. The kind of puncher that doesn't really change much from one fight to the next. Whereas Marlen, she's more the boxer and more cerebral than Gabriela. So if anyone is going to make adjustments ahead of a rematch, it would likely be Marlen before Gabriela, opening the door for Marlen to win a more convincing decision.
I say it all the time. Rematches are won by the fighter that can make the most adjustments, irrespective of what happened in their initial meeting, in their first fight. Rematches are won by the fighter who can change, the fighter who can take what they learned from the first fight and apply it to a rematch.
Fighter who can make the most adjustments. And pressure fighters like Gabriela Alaniz, in a very general sense, they don't change much from one fight to the next. They want to crowd the pocket, throw punches and bunches, and overwhelm their opponents with volume. That's what they do from one fight to the next, irrespective of who the fight is with. Whereas a boxer, a more cerebral fighter, like a Marlen Esparza, well, they're more likely to tweak things and change things, to use what they've learned from the first fight and apply it to the next so they can win more convincingly.
There's an argument that Marlen Esparza should not have been awarded the decision in their initial meeting in the first fight. But in the second, she might win more convincingly because she's more adaptable.
So even though I like Gabriela Alaniz, I like her style, I find her fights more entertaining than Marlen's, and even though I'm partial towards Gabriela, I don't think she wins the rematch. I didn't think she was going to win the first fight, and in the second, I think Marlen is going to adjust and win more decisively.
Because short of a knockout on a Golden Boy promotion show, you do not win a decision against Marlen Esparza.
In men's junior middleweight news, a story that broke late yesterday and took everybody by surprise. Mike Kopinger tweeted, rising star Tszyu will defend his junior middleweight title versus Keith Thurman. On March 30th in Las Vegas, sources told ESPN, Tszyu versus Thurman will headline the PBC's first pay-per-view as part of the new deal with Amazon's Prime Video. Thurman moves up to 154 for the first fight in 25 months. That's over 2 years. Ladies and gentlemen, the night of the fight, it will have been over 2 years since Keith Thurman fought Mario Barrios.
This story and all the particulars associated with it have left us with a lot to unpack.
It's a lot.
So let's start with the main event. Let's start with the fight itself. Thurman versus Tszyu. What do I think?
I think Keith Thurman is cashing out. In a word, that's what I think he's doing, because Tszyu is not the kind of fighter that you get off the couch to fight. Not after 2 years of inactivity and not at a new weight. No, you're
cashing out. You must be.
Tszyu, who wisely stayed active rather than waiting around for Jermell Charlo last year, is coming off a breakthrough campaign and now lands a big name in what shapes up as his toughest test yet. And Tszyu gets the Las Vegas fight that he was looking for. Is that what Keith Thurman is in today's boxing landscape? Is that what he is? A big name. It's a big deal.
I don't know how big it is. When Keith Thurman was on pay-per-view with Mario Barrios, it didn't sell anything.
Keith Thurman, who took 2 years off after he lost his WBA title to Manny Pacquiao, comes back 2 years later, fights Mario Barrios, takes 2 years off again. Whatever momentum he used to have, it's diminished, it's depleted. And his ability, what do you think 2 years away from the ring and the hot lights, what do you think that does to a fighter's ability and his reflexes, his sharpness? What do you think that does? Fighting at a new weight against a younger, bigger guy who's been more active than you are and is likely a lot stronger and sharper than you are. I don't have any illusions about this fight or what's about to happen, but some do. I saw one content creator say, if I see Thurman having success, this fight will resemble Thurman versus Danny Garcia. Tszyu's never been in the ring with an elite fighter with elite footwork and power. Thurman sets traps and is very awkward and unpredictable. This won't be easy if Thurman's timing is on display. If this, maybe that.
Timing? The guy said timing. How do you imagine 2 years of inactivity affects a fighter's timing? You think that's a good thing?
Not fighting for 2 years when a guy's in his mid-30s. Power? When's the last time we saw a display of power from Keith Thurman? I mean, seriously, he used to call himself one time. When's the last time that he actually showed some power and knocked somebody out?
9 years ago against Luis Collazo?
9 years ago. Close to a decade. That's how long it's been since Thurman knocked somebody out. Knocked somebody out at 147. What the hell's he gonna do up there at 154?
So when you say that he's got power and footwork and all these different things, yeah, maybe he used to.
Some people seem to be thinking of the image of Keith that they have in their head as the fighter that he used to be, not the fighter that he is. I think the same applies to Mike Kopinger's assessment that Keith Thurman is a big name. He's a big name.
Then why did his pay-per-view sell so poorly?
He's a familiar name. He's a name that we're all familiar with. We know of Keith Thurman. We know about him. We know that he exists. But we also know he hasn't fought in a very long time. That the night of the fight, it will have been roughly 2 years since he last saw action. And in his last fight, the one before this one, it was 2 years before he saw action that time. I mean, he's been doing this a long while. So while he is a familiar name, describing him as a big name, I don't know about that.
This is a keep busy fight for Tszyu. If it's anything, it's that. It's a keep busy fight against a familiar name.
Yeah, that maybe a couple of years ago, Keith Thurman might have been able to deal with a pressure guy. A couple of years ago, but a couple of years later, under these circumstances, he's fish food. Tim's gonna be too strong, too sharp, too aggressive, too active for him, and too big. Because Keith Thurman's done absolutely nothing as a junior middleweight.
He's been at welterweight for years, and he's not even a big welterweight. He's not even one of the bigger welterweights with the kind of frame where you could move up the junior middle. No,
I don't think this will end well for Keith Thurman, but it will end. This could very well be the end of Keith Thurman's professional boxing career. Tszyu, if he does to him what he's been doing to everybody else, he's going to retire Keith. I think this is Keith's swan song. I think this is his retirement fight.
On pay-per-view.
Why else would he be fighting a guy like this? Under these circumstances. You know, he wanted a big fight. He was pursuing a Crawford fight. At least he said he was pursuing a Crawford fight. But Crawford won't give him the time of day. Fighting Jaron Ennis won't pay you nothing.
Want to get your ass kicked for peanuts on a dollar?
Where is this guy? You know, he's got a title, some international name value, and if nothing else, American arrogance may be what's motivating Keith. He tells this guy, oh, this is just some white guy from Australia.
Yeah, it's just some guy's son. Some guy that used to box.
American arrogance and narcissism is a real thing. There are people out there that seem to think America is still the center of the boxing universe, the center of attention. They think themselves as being better just because the other guy isn't an American. I think, at least in part, that's what may have motivated Keith in tandem with being strapped for cash because he's been out so long, he hasn't fought in 2 years. You know, that's a part of what might have motivated him to take this fight. Is this the right fight to kick off the Amazon deal? I thought Javante was going to do that.
I guess he's not coming back in March. And if he doesn't come back in March, it's likely that when he does come back, it will have been a year since the Ryan Garcia fight. A year.
You want to pay attention to that, depending on who he ends up fighting next. As far as this show, this card, what is intended to kick off the Amazon Prime deal, Tszyu versus Thurman. On the undercard, they're saying we're going to see Lara versus Michael Zerafa, their mandated WBA middleweight title fight. And in the co-main event to the main event, they're saying we're going to see Romero versus Isaac Cruz. I thought we were going to get Rolly versus Ryan.
I told you, there's a lot to unpack.
Many months ago, last year, it was reported that the people at the PBC convinced Michael Zerafa to stand down and step aside so that Danny Garcia could get a shot at Arislandi Lara, Lara's WBA title. We now know that that doesn't look to be happening, which means, I don't know, guess Danny's left without a dance partner for now. Danny's already been out for over a year. So is Lara, and so is Michael.
All three of those guys sat out all of last year and haven't seen action since 2022.
Do you remember what I told you when news first broke that the PBC would be jumping into bed with Amazon, but they would only have 12 to 14 fight dates to work with? Do you remember?
Do you remember that I told you that a good number of their fighters, they would start to float away because you can't accommodate 120 or 150 fighters with only 12 to 14 fight dates. The math, it ain't mathin'.
We've already seen former champions in Jarrett Hurd, Mark Mixayo, Angelo Leo fight in very small shows that weren't PBC shows. We saw Luis Ortiz go all the way to Colombia for a goddamn journeyman with losses in the double digits. So fighters floating away, that's already started to happen. Meanwhile, pay attention to the card. You've got Arislandi Lara versus Michael Zerafa, Rolly Romero versus Isaac Cruz, and Tszyu versus Keith Thurman. Under normal circumstances, all three of those fights would be billed as separate main events. Separate fights. They're putting them all together. Why?
Why?
And those are all title fights. Romero versus Cruz is for the WBA title at 140 pounds. Tszyu versus Thurman is for the WBO title at 154 pounds. And Lara versus Zerafa, that's for the WBA title at 160.
3 title fights in one show. Where normally, those guys, they headline their own shows. They're putting them all together in this one.
Arislandi Lara. He used to be a headliner. He used to headline his own shows. Rolly Romero. He's headlined his own shows. Once or twice. And Tszyu, we know he's a headliner.
What's your point?
My point is, I told you, upon them inking this deal with Amazon, because many of the fights they want to do are going to be on pay-per-view, they've got to double stuff the undercards. If you want to make an impression on the people at Amazon, you got to double stuff those undercards in the hope that that will help sell the card, help sell the whole show. That Tszyu versus Keith Thurman is not a strong enough main event that you can have a weak undercard. No, you've got to decorate it. You've got to double stuff it with familiar faces and fights that are interesting, at least fights that you deem interesting. Under normal circumstances, a fight like Romero versus Cruz, not only would that be a main event, but they would bill it as a pay-per-view.
They billed Ruiz versus Areola as a pay-per-view. Luis Ortiz versus Charles Martin as a pay-per-view. Luis Ortiz versus Andy Ruiz as a pay-per-view. And under normal circumstances,
this would be a pay-per-view. Not just a pay-per-view, it would be the main event of a pay-per-view. pay-per-view under normal circumstances. But the PBC know they're backed into a corner. They've got to decorate these cards as best as they can to do robust numbers. Try to. They really need people to buy this show, to buy this card. So they're pulling out all the stops as best as they can, given what they have. But I thought Rolly was fighting Ryan. Wasn't that the story yesterday? Yesterday he's fighting Ryan. Today he's fighting Isaac.
You have to take the news in as it comes.
And that's the news. That's the story right now. Until it changes, we're going to operate on that assumption. We're going to operate on the assumption that Rolly Romero walked away from a Ryan Garcia fight, a main event on pay-per-view, that he would be headlining opposite the ring, Ryan Garcia. We're going to operate on the assumption that Rolly walked away from a main event to fight in a co-main event.
You think he's that stupid?
You have to ask? In case you're not aware, the fighters on the undercard, the fighters on the prelim card or the main card, the fighters in the co-main event, they don't get the same money that the fighters in the main event do. So don't get it in your head that Rolly's gonna make more money with Isaac in a co-main event than he could have made and would have made with Ryan in the main event.
Oh, he would have made more money with Ryan.
Because it's in the main event that you get into the upside of a pay-per-view and what you might make if the pay-per-view breaks even. Everything you make after that. That pertains to the main event fighters, not the co-main event fighters, not the guys on the undercard. So by all accounts, this was a boneheaded move.
Until now, I thought Rolly wised up and realized that the best money out there for him is a Ryan Garcia fight, because if you fight somebody else, anybody really, you might lose. Because you suck.
Story is he's defending his WBA title against Isaac Cruz. That would make this a voluntary title defense, not a mandatory title defense. Ishmael Barroso, he just fought a few weeks ago. The WBA is giving Rolly leniency here if they actually allow him to fight Isaac voluntarily.
Because Ishmael is mandatory.
But who's really surprised that the WBA is giving a PBC fighter leniency? They end up losing that belt to Isaac. He's not so good a boxer that you can trust him to get the job done. And if he does lose to Isaac, you've lost all your leverage with Ryan.
That belt is the only real leverage he had.
And if Isaac beats you, well, there goes the neighborhood.
He's even dumber than I thought.